Hello, I'm Ava Kuredjian. I'm WPR's music producer, and I am joined here today with the host and executive producer of The Road to Higher Ground, Jonathan Øverby. Such a pleasure. Um, if you want to maybe introduce yourself and your show and kind of give your background into what you do here at WPR, that would be great.
Well, I am delighted to say hello and to champion the Road to Higher Ground, which I've been a part of since 1994. And 2006, it evolved from a talk show to a variety show, and then into the current format of the program as a world music broadcast. So I think that's somewhere around 30 plus years.
Very impressive. I'm so excited to talk with you about kind of world music and everything that it kind of encompasses and what we can learn from it. Um, so yeah, let's get into it. My first kind of question for you has to do with innovation in the world music space. One of my favorite things about world music is that it can be seen as a way to unite different peoples and different cultures. And I think that's a really special thing. Um, so can you kind of share an example of a time or a genre where two different musical traditions from different places kind of come together and form a fusion or something new?
Well, one of the key things to launch from is this idea that every culture has its own life form, musical pulse, if you will. And one of the beautiful things, in my view, about world music, as we categorize it, is for different traditions and sounds to embrace the opportunity to evolve when they meet, mingle, and in some cases marry with other global styles. And is it something new that's created, or is it just a mirror that actually both sustains the original form, or does it carry uh, a musical heartbeat that becomes a union, if you will, a united pulse that reflects both the original language, the landscape, and the lived experiences with that meeting? I think your question is quite profound. When two people meet, they talk. In some cases, they become interested in each other's life issues, where there is tension and sometimes transformation. Sometimes it's transcendence. Sometimes it's spiritual. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of world music where the blending doesn't erase the original nuances, the rhythms, or the voicings, but it revoices them. And I think it's very liberating. It's actually very spiritual to see one's own voice in the musical signature of another group.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I apologize. It's very special to kind of see your own musical, I guess, heartbeat is what you're saying, come across in something you didn't even realize. And I think that's what's really special about your show. Um, so yeah, I appreciate that answer.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Let me add one little nuance to this. So, you asked for an example, and let me throw just an idea out here. Um, the encounter between West African drumming traditions and European harmonic systems, like in the Caribbean, the American South, out of the convergence with son cubano, a style of music in Cuba that ended up informing jazz that was born in New Orleans. These two particular musical languages ended up creating a dialogue that would dominate the musical landscape of North America. In fact, there are African elements in New Orleans jazz. All of this coming from both the influence of colonialism by the French, the uh, unfortunate reality of slavery, new immigrants coming to that particular part of the U.S. from Italy and Germany, from Italy, and other places that began to help um, form a new language because they brought their own musical traditions with them. Both First Nation indigenous elements existed during these early days around the late 1800s, if you will, and it gave rise to a particular style of music that we now call jazz, which is, you know, it's bled across the entire world because of its appeal to other styles of music that are now incorporating jazz elements into their own music making without losing their original voice in that creation.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to look into, I mean, across the world, but I think specifically in America, how many of the genres that we're so familiar with have very complicated roots, which is partially why so many people can connect with them and why they're such, I don't know, phenomenons across the world. But yeah, I was going to ask you if there are any genres that we are familiar with today that have these kinds of roots and fusion, but I think you kind of just answered that. And that's just one example of many, which is so interesting.
Well, it's the human uh, reality of curiosity and uh, seeing a story, your story as an individual and my story as an individual being connected at the point of finding universalisms and commonality in our stories that end up having both a sense of celebration of what are both the unique elements and also the universalisms that create bridges and understanding. And one of the reasons that I am committed to doing this program is because I think there's an important responsibility to help continue increasing and spreading that understanding, not only from artists of the distant past, but also today, artists from London to Sao Paulo to Seoul, who are reinterpreting the sound of what was considered or is considered traditional and folding it into new music, if you will, electronic music that includes hip hop and classical fusions, providing, if you will, a platform for cultural mingling that give birth to new musical identities, and not just from the standpoint of using the lens of Eurocentric classical music as the launching point.
That kind of leads perfectly into my next question, which is also about innovation in the world music space, as the first one was. Um, and it's kind of about bringing these traditional folk, maybe musical traditions into modern spaces, whether that's with the production or different instruments, electronics, whatever. How do you think artists can walk that line of staying true to their cultural musical traditions, but also exploring something new, being innovative?
Well, in my thinking, and that's another just really powerful, rich question, is that they have no obligation to limit themselves to retaining the roots of their own music. They're free to jump in with both feet to um, explore music that's not aligned with their own cultural experience. I think the key um, is to be true as best one can to being both respectful and edifying of the tradition that's outside of their own cultural experience. And it's not a case of, well, how well they do it, but are they attempting to be true to the form that they're exploring? I think it's fascinating. And I think it's a wonderful journey to look at how groups who are aligned with Wolof music, Korean music, Arabic, or Portuguese music are looking to broaden their own musical horizons. Yes, both a reshaping of the original sound, but also to find a point of cadence, if you will, to be able to say, I'm going to step off the edge here and go beyond the original story to live in the space of another culture's musical creations, and to live in that space, to dine on it, to sleep on it, eat it, ingest it, explore it in a way uh, that can perhaps give the artist a greater understanding of that particular culture. And it can be a beautiful experience to work in this particular manner. That can also, once the artist has had that experience, to be able to uh, cross the bridge back home, if you will, and find that there's a level of evolution that is it's certainly okay to do, and that is to have these cross-cultural dialogues in music that are both curious. Sometimes they work really well, in some cases they don't work so well, but it's that journey of wanting to see our humanity in each other as a spiritual journey. I think it's a wonderful statement about life itself and how oral traditions can move beyond just that particular way of creating sounds and move to spaces where there's actually a scientific approach to how music is scored and how it's played, and there's a treatise, a technique, and all of those things, which I think creates some wonderful tension. For example, hip hop. We can all, I think, hear it, and when we hear spoken word, identify it. But it has taken on a universal medium, if you will. And rap music is something that is so powerful all around the world that people are taking that particular genre of music and inserting it into their own musical stories, and it becomes a dominant force of expression for that particular group.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see. I feel like almost every country now has their own form of like rap and hip hop. Yeah, very, very interesting. Last question having to do with innovation. Um, it's just so exciting. I had to ask all these questions about it. Um, how do certain artists, I know some of them bring in maybe like old instruments, ancient instruments into modern studios and kind of use those in their music. How does that kind of innovation change the way that we interact with and experience those ancient instruments?
Hmm. Well, you've done your homework. This is fascinating. Uh, a fascinating conversation with you because you raise some of the most critical aspects to what we now call world music. So, to your question, when artists bring traditional or indigenous music into modern spaces, um, in my estimation, they're not just blending sounds, they're navigating identity, memory, and responsibility. And that's not always an easy journey. It's not always clear. Um, one thing is for sure that it's a delicate journey to take. How to evolve a living tradition without exploiting or diluting it. And I think the balance can and often depends on what is the intention and process involved. If the artists who remain grounded in the meaning and context of their source traditions tend to create works that feel like a continuation and not appropriation, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that's something to celebrate. When they collaborate with their elders, using traditional languages or instruments with respect, and treat electronic tools as an extension or extensions of ancestral voices and not replacements, I think that is a powerful tribute to be able to make. You can take certain artists who are dedicated to this, who are trying to take the opportunities they have to be innovative and to deepen their musical experiences rather than to erase the roots of the music. It's a paradox, but I think it's a beautiful one when traditions approach the uncharted land to go where no musician has gone before, if you will, with reverence and experimentation. I think it can strengthen the original sound, the traditional sound. But the key really is remembering that that technology and modern production, they're tools, okay? But the heart of the music still beats in the culture that it comes from. And I think we need to be very, very careful about that, to be mindful of it, and to also be really sensitive to not trying to replace something, but perhaps, and I think in my view, build upon the tradition that came before.
Yeah, so many opportunities for growth just across the globe. So exciting. Um, I think all of those answers have kind of almost touched on this question that has been plaguing, I think, a lot of us recently, and that's the issue of appropriation and appreciation. Because we've all seen so many different scenarios of artists maybe going to another country, taking inspiration from another country or culture's music, and then using that and maybe taking credit for it and being given credit for it, being given credit for discovering this, or maybe even inventing that when that's just not the case. How do you think an artist can go about taking inspiration from another culture in a respectful way, doing it as appreciation as opposed to appropriation?
Well, I think you nailed it when you used the word doing it with respect and being mindful of the historical um context and setting in which the original music was born. You can try and run from that, but those who are part of that particular culture or region of the world, or who are practitioners of that sound, they will recognize when they're being ripped off. And I think it's sad. Uh, Colonialism has done a lot of damage to cultures around the world. And without naming specific cultures who've been a part of that musical artistic tragedy, I think the important thing is to remember and to be mindful that music is, it, let me just back up and say it. Throughout history, music has been more than just entertainment. And if the goal is just to rip off some other particular style and to claim it as one, as something that a particular artist owns, it's 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 not right. It's not ethical, um, and consumers should resist that. I think it's important to embrace the idea of remembrance and revolution of the whole idea of authorship. There's a difference between authorship and ownership. No particular part of the world, no particular style of music, no tradition can claim that they own a particular style of music, if you will. It carries the voice of the people who created it. And when you try and say it's ours and it belongs to no one else, you actually do damage and you silence the voices who created it, which in some cases it may have been directed for more internal consumption, but the world has a right to be able to both hear it, experience it, celebrate it, critique it, and challenge it. I think that's a part of what is makes us unique to be able to, in our own humanity, to say, I hear it. I don't necessarily like it. I don't necessarily understand it. But should a person make the next step to go, I appreciate it and see its value to another culture. And I think that's part of what is important to understand when we even talk about the term world music is how do we keep an open mind to the lived experiences, the ritual space, how many of these forms of music created community, and can those of us who don't practice it, can we still find a way to celebrate it because it means so much to the group that created it? Whether we go into the studio and sample nuances, a measure here, a looping here, a reverb sound here, if we layer it with our own style, it's important that if we expand upon a tradition, we don't distort it. And we give credit to the people who are the original authors. And we, in my thinking again, we can take not so, how do I say, I wouldn't say tragedy, but the unfortunate idea of the business realm of creating world music. It has controversy. Uh, it's wrapped in that in terms of how a marketing effort helped to create give these artists a platform, but it was all about business. But that business can transform itself into being a place where artists can go who don't find a space for their music to be heard. And it's not ideal. But can it be? And here's the challenge. Can it be a place for better understanding those particular unique, less heard styles of music? There's a similar tension, in my view, with defining what is classical music. Are we talking about Eurocentric classical music or classical music in general? If we talk about Hindustani classical music compared to Eurocentric classical music, there is a significant difference. It's the notation is different, but the scoring of the music, the performance of the music is just as profoundly important for each category. And that is something that we should be focused on in the form of celebration and the cultural diversity of music making. It's complicated, as world music and the term created traction in the 1980s. Marketing folks began to try and sell non-Western sounds in Europe and American markets. And so from the beginning, there was this category of difference, and everybody didn't embrace it the same way. But I think it's evolved, and we need more time to see where, over the next decade or two, or even longer, how institutions define and or embrace or not uh, world music categories from record labels to festival curators, journalists, and all of that kind of thing.
I think that leads me into my favorite question that I get to ask you, which is about the term world music. I come from a background where I was a college DJ and I had a world music show, and I always kind of took issue with that claim because I just kind of saw it as a barrier between maybe, I don't know if you would define it as like English speaking music and non-music that's not in English, or if it would be Western and non-Western. But it just seems to really separate people, where I think music should be something that unites people. And then even touching on classical music, it's like, well, you consider French like music, classical music, traditional, whatever, but you wouldn't consider Hindustani classical music. And it's like, where do we draw those lines and why are we drawing them there? And I think it's time for some introspection and reflection about that term. Um, and
I think it's
so,
a good challenge
yeah,
to ponder the very question that you raise. Uh, there is a point of coming to terms with who's making the determination that world music is not a good term to use. Who's making that? Is it a collective of artists from those, if you will, third world countries or categories where they don't get a lot of airplay or attention? Are their voices being heard? And are those voices being uh, uh, in a welcoming, hospitable way invited to the conversation? And in addition to that, where do they go, if you will, a very loose word to use, where do they go to get their music heard in a world that is categorically fairly separatist? And this idea of which particular style of music is the most important, what platform is used to define what is high music, if you will, highbrow music, or the most elegant music, the greatest composers, and all those kinds of things. The voices that aren't heard very often are the voices of people who are making these non-Western sounds. And I don't think you can erase or ignore the challenges. I don't think you can flatten out the whole idea with just using one term. But does the term world music create in and of itself an opportunity for others to be invited in whose sounds don't get the same kind of welcoming, hospitable uh, door opening to exposure, if you will. So I think it's good to continue to struggle with it. When music from like Mali, India, Peru are placed under one umbrella, it does risk erasing the distinct histories, languages, the spiritual meaning, if you will, behind those traditions. But it's also a place to go to where you can hear them, and you can hear them in a non, uh, uh, exotic kind of setting where the consumer can explore whether they have interest in better understanding the music. You're not going to see world music, I don't believe, played on classical music shows as a rule. But in my view, and I'm open to being challenged by this, I think it's all world music. The foundation of many of the great Eurocentric classical music compositions have an historical connection to early forms of folk and parlor music, if you will, village sounds that evolved over the years into great compositions. It just doesn't mean that because of that appeal of a particular style that it is at the top of the heap. So I think it's good to continue to uh, it's okay to not have it clearly defined, but to reinforce that, in my view, world music does reinforce giving visibility to the artists who don't have access to technology. And every piece of music created um, doesn't need to come from an English language perspective or promotion or by major label partnerships. And that's growing, needs to grow even more. And I think the balance is where do we start? And if the world music is a unfortunate catch-all phrase asking whose world, whose music, it's a good thing. I think the goal is to shift from consumption to conversation, if you will, and to move from discovery of other cultures to listening on equal ground. And that's no plug for my show, but I think it's the idea of being able to hear those voices and then make some determinations without having one particular culture define what that music represents or categorically where it should live.
I like that idea of the term kind of being a door that we're opening, but we're not just ending it there. It's a conversation that we're going to continue to have. Um, Last question for you, and this kind of goes back to a point you made earlier, which I really like, which is that music is not just for entertainment. And I think music and art in general kind of get discounted as, oh, like people make what they want to make and it's just for fun. And it's not that at all. If you look back in history, music has really carried a lot of social and political movements across time around the world. Um, in your view, how do you see, or how have you seen, I guess, world music giving voices to these kinds of music movements across the globe?
Well, it's a ticklish question that you ask, and one that I need to be careful about not getting into trouble about. But I'll say this. Uh, the one thing I'm going to sort of go around the block, as my grandfather would say, to answer a question and to go next door. So I'm going to go all the way around the block to answer, is that many of the stories behind musical motifs. We don't often know what those stories are about, but they evolve, and someone took, a measure or two or a line or here or some oral aspect of it and created something grand from it. And they take that and they use it and to express a um, make a statement about it. Sometimes it's camouflaged, sometimes it's out in the open. Um, but the one of the real hard pieces is when those expressions are uh, either transparent or camouflaged to convey a story. Um, let me let me give an example as I'm struggling with how to frame your an answer to your question. For example, American spirituals, some of them had coded messages in those spirituals. Steal away to Jesus, just one of the examples of a call to respond. There are also other forms in which, when there were wars going on, people would express their sentiments about wars or corruption within the government. We saw that in various places in Africa where there was significant corruption, or apartheid in South Africa. And so through music, um, uh, advocates, protesters could share their sentiments about what was happening to their particular communities, culturally speaking. Women's voices have had an enormous impact on shaping so many of the world's sounds. That's a full conversation needed on how women have sustained many of the traditions that we take for granted and make assumptions that men created them. Um, and so you get this space, or you can step into the space and ask yourselves, what are people trying to express in music? And there are all the human emotions, from love to hatred to resistance to asking for peace, to exposing um, how some groups are marginalized. There are songs that have to do with celebrating our collective humanity. Maybe not the best example, but "We Are the World" with Michael Jackson and company. Those kinds of pieces. So it's all over the place, and music allows for that. Um, and sometimes when you listen to a song, you think, "Oh, it's great to dance to. It feels so good. You can move." And then you listen to the lyrics and you go, "Wait a minute, this is not a love song. This is about exposing um, the inhumane treatment of a particular group, and it's expressed through music, and often in coded language, so that it conveys to the community on which the music arises that the musician is with them, uh, resonates with their struggle, but it's also to tell a bigger story to the broader world. The world, if it's listening, can better understand that community. So I think often musicians create, and I straighten my hat out here. It looks a little cockamamie. There you go, maybe a little better. Is um, is the unfortunate oppression of so many groups around the world, and music becomes that place where they can relieve themselves of the pain and the hurt. I mean, what topic is more painful to experience than love and the loss of love? Now, you can argue with that, but I mean, you know, in country music, stereotypically, my girlfriend left me, took the dog, and my life is over. There's these stories that you can identify with because maybe you've had that same experience. And so this is not a finished story. And we don't need to try to answer all of the questions. The mystery is exploring and being able to be a part of that conversation and to have voices heard that are opposing viewpoints, that express um, ideas about whatever the topic is. So I think it's a good thing. And I think we tend to want, those of us who are, ethnomusicologists in some cases, we need to give definitions to things. And often they're from a Eurocentric lens, far too often. What we call things, how we perceive their parallels or their relationship to other instruments. When you can call something one thing and find out in the original culture, they don't call it that at all. Or in some cases where we use a term and we find out that that term is no longer being used. The artist has moved on to something new and fresh for them. And so we're behind already. So I think one of the keys is, put on your seatbelt, strap in, and ride the wave of celebration and understanding the opportunity to better understand different groups through music.
I agree. I like
I
that.
don't know if you put a seatbelt on to ride a wave. Anyway, that maybe didn't flow as well as I intended.
We'll consult the surfers.
Yeah, there you
We'll
go.
see what they think. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And I like that we have done our part a little bit in opening that door and kind of starting to talk about some of these things in the realm of world music. So, Dr. O, do you have any final parting words?
Well, thank you. This has been fun. In 30 plus years, this is the first time I've ever been asked some of these critical questions and had a chance to talk about them and to um, go beyond just letting the music speak for itself. Often people want to know, well, what do you think? What do you feel? And help me better understand the story of world music and what it means and what its impact in my thinking it should be. And um, it's an unfinished work, if you will. But it doesn't mean we can't start playing it. It doesn't mean we can't stop at the point where there's just no more music, and we wait until the future reveals what should be the next measure. And that's good. Life should have some mystery, and I think that's a healthy, at least for me, way to approach music. Is never being satisfied with what it is, but what it could be.
That's a great note to end on.